You're listening to Keystone Cold Cases, a podcast where we reignite cold cases across Pennsylvania.
Hey, it's Chelsea.
Hi, it's Shannon.
Hi, this is Caitlin. Welcome to Keystone Cold Case Podcast. I'm your host for tonight, and we'll be delving into a chilling, unsolved murder case that has haunted the town of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania since the 1970s. Today, we're delving into the tragic and mysterious murder of Holly Branagan. On March 28, 1979, 17-year-old Maura Holly Branagan was found brutally murdered in her family's home at 496 Pine Top Drive in Bethlehem. Holly lived with her father, Richard, a salesman for Lone Star Cement Company, and her brother, Sean, an 18-year-old freshman at Lehigh Community College. Their mother, Peggy, had died a few years earlier from leukemia on Thanksgiving Day. The family resided in a modern three-story house built by Richard and Peggy in the 1960s, nestled in a secluded wooded area with a circular driveway and a wraparound deck in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Holly was a senior at Freedom High School, known by peers as quiet yet friendly once you got to know her. She occasionally partied but was not labeled, as they termed, a head or a pothead. She just kind of dabbled in fun. And she was quite popular. She had recently become the manager for the boys' soccer team, which boosted her popularity further. Her soccer coach, or the soccer coach that she managed, Skip Rodenbach, praised her work ethic, noting she rarely missed practices or games where she was responsible for tasks like filling water bottles and retrieving balls. He described her as an all-American gal. Her friend Sally had mentioned that while Holly didn't have a boyfriend that she could recall, she did have a crush on a soccer player named Dave Eltringham, though this was just common teenage chatter. She was also involved in the school choir, where her teacher admired her maturity and her composure, especially after her mother's death. Her murder sent shockwaves through the close community, leaving a mystery that has baffled investigators for over 4 decades.
That's just so terrible. It seems like the family has really been going through a hard time during this time period.
Oh, yeah. So her dad lost his wife, and then a couple years later, now his daughter is murdered in an awful way. And let's revisit the chilling day of March 28th, 1979. It was a Wednesday when Holly was dropped off at her home by her friend Sally around 2:45 after school. As reported by the Morning Call, which is like the local newspaper, Holly went upstairs to change. She came to the kitchen to prepare some Jell-O and grab a soda, and then she spent the rest of the afternoon chatting with friends on the phone, and she had plans that night to go to Pizza Hut at 6 p.m. with a friend. So on that particular day, her dad was going on a business trip to Atlantic City, and her brother was out at his friend's house working on a car, so she was home alone by herself and talking on the phone. So during one of these conversations with her friend, she heard a knock at the door. She told her friend, "Hold on, someone's at the door," and went downstairs. The front door had skylights, which would have allowed Holly to see who was there, suggesting that she probably knew her visitor. She informed her guest that she was on a call, and she picked up the downstairs phone. This was in the 1970s, so, you had the corded line. She picked up the phone downstairs and told her phone that, somebody was at her house and that she'd call him back. And then, around 4:45, she called her dad's office to check if he had left for his business trip. And a lot of people think this is possibly indicating that the visitor might have been looking for her father or asked for her father. This was the last time anyone heard from her. Her brother, Sean, like I said, was at his friend's. They were working on a car and enjoying the start of his college spring break. And he eventually decided, after eating dinner there, that he was just going to spend the night and they were going to keep working on the car. So he tried calling home later that night to check on Holly, and he got a busy signal. But he didn't really think too much of it at the time because, back then, if you're on the phone with your friends all night, you're likely going to get a busy signal. And
well, honestly, that's what I was going to say. Like, they didn't have cell phones back then.
Mm-hmm.
So they were clogging up the phone, and because it was busy, which I'm assuming because you said that she had the phone upstairs, I'm assuming that's why there was a busy signal.
Yeah, so here's the weird part. She left the phone off the hook upstairs when the visitor came, and then she picked up the phone downstairs and told her friend that she would call her back. But what's strange is they have a timeline where she supposedly called her dad's office after she got off the phone with her friend. So, but when they found her, which I will get to, the phone upstairs was off the hook.
Right. So did she
interesting.
call her dad first? And because I don't, unless I'm missing it, I don't see a time where it says she was talking to that friend when someone came to the door. So was it possibly after the call to her father?
Unless she went upstairs and hung up the phone, and then maybe whoever was there, took it off the hook again to make it seem like, that's how things were at the time. But it's pretty, set in stone, I guess, that she called at 4:45, especially because she called her dad's secretary, which, if you're a secretary, you're probably keeping track of the time, especially back then, when people call. I know a lot of, jobs, they'll actually have you write down the time when people call, stuff like that. So they said it was around 4:45, which would have been after she got off the phone with her friend. So that's always been strange to me. I can't quite figure out how that came about, but
I wonder if, because you said that indicating the visitor might have been looking for her father, is it possible that she went upstairs and called her father from upstairs, and this person came up after the fact? And
maybe, and then but she was killed downstairs, so they could have came up and then went back down. But it is strange.
Well, could it have been that maybe they put up a struggle, and during the struggle they jostled the phone off? Because I remember having a phone, and I guess it depends what kind of phone. If it's a rotary phone or one of those I want to call them handheld phones, but you know what I'm talking about, the ones that had that cradle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
those are so easily to knock over.
Yeah.
So
for sure,
was there a struggle?
There was signs of a slight struggle in the kitchen, but there wasn't signs of a struggle anywhere else that I recall reading about. So, the friend that was going to Pizza Hut with her arrived at 6 p.m. to pick her up, but there was no answer at the door. People wonder if the killer, possibly still could have been there, or, because they would have had a decent amount of time to... So, let me give the details and then I'll get back to that. So later, the next morning, Sally stops by to pick up Holly for school. She starts honking the car horn to get no response. So she goes to the door, and she sees the family dog Clancy through the side lights, and she could hear a radio playing. And she thought about going to the whole house. The only way I can really explain it is, do you ever see those modern house? It kind of reminds me of a house from Mad Men, they're always in the woods, and they got the big glass windows all around. It's a very modern house, and it was kind of a circular driveway, and you would pull up in the circular driveway, and kind of like a hotel, it would pull up at the front door, and there was a deck over top of the front door that wrapped around the entire house, and then you would just go around the circle and pull out. So she went to the front door, and then she was like, all right, well, let me go check the back door. I'll go around and check the back. So she went to go up the steps in the back, and she got nervous. She didn't want to be rude. So she was like, all right, you know what, never mind. I'm like not going to be weird and go look inside her windows. I'm just going to go to school. I'm already late.
Can I interject really fast? Mm-hmm. I feel like back then people were so worried about rustling feathers or getting people's like panties in a twist. And that's why I feel so many crimes are so prevalent in like the 70s and 80s into the 90s, because like, oh, we don't talk about that, or oh, you can't step out of line. There is, especially because like a lot of crimes happen against women, and there's expectations from men with women, and it just blows my mind. And that kind of just like how you just said, she didn't want to like feel like she was intruding. Like if I went to pick up a friend on Friday night and then or whatever day, and then the next day still not answering, I'd probably take the door down.
Yeah, I'd be all up in
personally.
The windows, like being nosy, looking in the windows, knocking. You know, I would definitely be that person. But I feel like it was different. Like you said, it's different back then. You know, you were very like they didn't want to intrude or be rude. I guess. So later that day, her brother Sean, he tries to call again, and he gets the busy signal, which kind of scares him a little bit. So he comes home around 11:45 a.m. and he has his friend with him. They find Holly dead, lying face down on the kitchen floor with a 10-inch kitchen knife plunged into her side, and its handle broke off beside her. So it almost seems like it was a rage. Somebody was very angry, and the only thing that stopped them was the knife breaking. So, panicking, they rushed to a neighbor's house to call 911 and call Richard, their dad. And officers arrived to find the scene still intact. One officer, Craig Petco, recalled Sean guiding them to the kitchen. So they were about to kick the door in, and Sean walks up on the house and is like, oh, hey, I'll let you guys in, and opens the door, and he walks them into the kitchen and says, there she is. She had been viciously stabbed 18 times, with the initial chest wounds being fatal. She had several major wounds and some defensive injuries, suggesting she tried to fend off the knife blows, or on her hand. She had cuts on her hands. The knife was from her own kitchen, and her father had speculated she might have grabbed the knife in self-defense or to get whoever was in her house out of her house, and it just went south from there. So the investigation revealed no forced entry, no assault, no SA, no robbery, and it pointed to someone Holly might have known, because if you have, big, long side lights on your door and you can see who's at your door, and if it's someone you don't recognize, you're probably not going to let them in the house. But if it's someone you know, then you're likely going to let them in.
I don't know. I'm going to interject again, because I swear it goes back to the same thing. She is a young kid. You really needed to respect your elders. Like, you didn't want to be rude. Mm-hmm. Like, it could have been anyone saying, oh, my car broke down, or, oh, maybe my wife's sick, or anything to get into the house. And back then, I feel like stranger danger just wasn't there.
Yep. Right. Especially now we have social media, and you hear all these, horrific things. Back then, things, were in the newspaper, but it didn't get around as much, so people weren't as scared back then. Or
I think they have that, mentality, like, it won't happen to me, or not in my town, basically.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The scene suggested a sudden violent outburst. There was a few magnets that had fallen off the fridge, and a chair turned around, hinting at a brief struggle. The phone was off the hook, up in her room, left open all night, adding to the mystery. Now, on the refrigerator, there was spelled, those, letter magnets? There was spelled on the refrigerator, violator, but they actually figured out later, Sean's friend, Mike Viola, his last name was Viola, so they would, make jokes about his last name, and I guess they had written it on the fridge, so there wasn't any connection to her murder. So, and back then, this was an era when crime scene processing was less sophisticated. officers moved through the home without gloves. They did pretty good under the circumstances, but I know they did get like fingernail clippings, photos, and some DNA. They got fingerprints, but the problem was there were so many cops that had gone into the home that day and touched things that there was just so many fingerprints on everything that I don't believe they could really get like a viable fingerprint out of it. And the lack of physical evidence and the brutal nature of the attack have left this case unsolved, a haunting reminder of a life taken too soon by someone very angry and nobody knows. So the suspects over the decade, numerous theories have emerged regarding Holly's murder, with several suspects named, yet no arrests were ever made. What makes it even stranger is the release of the movie Halloween just months before her death led to speculation about similar motives and methods. So you had Holly, who was like the neighborhood babysitter. She babysat the kids in her neighborhood. She got killed by a big kitchen knife and, a horrible murder, which Halloween had just come out. So people were wondering if, they were copying the movie or if it was somebody that was like obsessed with the movie or trying to, reenact it. And some initially suspected Holly's brother Sean due to, the way he was like so like, oh, hey, there she is. But however, Sean and their father Richard were cleared. Richard obviously was in Atlantic City, and Sean's alibi was confirmed by his friend's mother. Sean had later attempted to provoke a confession by hinting he knew who the killer was to anyone he could talk to, against his father's wishes, who feared for his son's safety, which leads to this strange story. So now you have Peggy, their mother, dying from leukemia tragically, Holly dying from being tragically murdered, and now tragedy struck again 6 months after Holly's death on September 9th, 1979, when Sean was working at his job at Renner's Mobile Service Station. While cleaning with gasoline, which I thought was absolutely crazy, but apparently it's actually like a common thing people did back then, and I think even some people I've seen said they do it now. If there's like a oil stain, like in a garage, that people will use gasoline to clean it, which I never knew.
I have literally never have ever heard of that.
And neither did I. I was like, wow, what a death sentence. Why would anybody do that? But apparently it's a thing that I did not know about. So while he was cleaning the floor with gasoline, a spark from a borrowed, like a pressure washer type thing from... There was a restaurant next door to the gas station. They had borrowed their pressure washer, and it had like a faulty switch, and it ignited a spark, which blew the entire gas station up. Now, the doors were closed, but some of the windows had been broken. Sean tried to climb out of the garage. His friend Mike, who worked with him, was luckily outside at the time, like outside of the garage, so he wasn't there in there. He tried to pull Sean out through the window. Eventually he was able to get Sean out of the garage and put the flames out, but Sean had 80% of his body was covered in burns.
Oh my gosh. That is so terrible.
Yeah. And he was severely burned, and he succumbed to his injuries 9 days later at Sacred Heart Hospital, and the incident was ruled an accident. But Richard he always believed, the dad believed it was a setup, or that somebody was trying to set Sean up, because he thinks that people actually thought that Sean knew who the killer was because he was going around saying, I know who the killer is, and then they set him up. And then get this, adding to the mystery, the owner of the King Chef restaurant where they borrowed the pressure washer from was found dead years later with a head injury and strychnine in his system, in his car. Like, it just parked somewhere in his car. He was found dead with a head injury and strychnine.
What is that?
It's like
I don't know what that is.
It's like a
poison,
chemical
right?
poison. Yeah, it was in his system.
It's not
So
what you
that-
hear
I just
of,
wanna
I don't
say-
think, anymore.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I think this family is absolutely cursed. Like,
Right?
the absolute horrific events of this poor family. And I don't know, maybe if it was just the son's death, maybe the father wouldn't be so suspicious. But, like, those types of accidents happen literally all the
Yeah.
time. Like, I remember a couple years ago, I came home and it was all three of us, and Sean smokes, and one of our cats had accidentally was on our stove and knocked our gas on, and it had just been filling with gas all day, and he was so close to lighting his cigarette by the time I opened the door. And I mean, it could have been terrible.
Wow.
Like, accidents happen all the time.
Oh, I can't tell you how many times I put a pizza box in the oven and forgot it was there, and then turned the oven on and
Oh my gosh.
bring a
I
flaming
literally
pizza
just-
box outside.
Well, I literally just saw a TikTok where a woman put a pizza box on the thing, I guess to like cool down or be ready for dinner, and the cat got on her stove and turned on the burner, and it caused a fire. Like I said, accidents everywhere.
Yeah, I think it was just a tragic accident, but I mean, I can understand why his father would be like, like, you know, wondering and thinking that somebody could have set him up.
Right.
He had just lost his family in a matter of like what, 3.5 years. So, you know, imagine losing your entire family in all tragic ways. It just was so awful. So another suspect who I would say is the most mentioned suspect that I've read about. It's pretty like around the board that people think this is the guy. Although there isn't really any concrete evidence there. It's just circumstantial and theories at best. But even the cops have hinted that, you know, they believe this guy is their guy. So, this suspect, his name is Sidney Eltringham. I don't know if you guys remember me mentioning that last name earlier, but Holly had a crush on Dave Eltringham, which was Sidney's son. And he may have been her boyfriend. So people don't recall her having a boyfriend, but people think there's a possibility that they were kind of just like a fling. You know, he was a year older than her. I believe he was going to Penn State University. I could be wrong on the college, but from what I've read, it seems like he was going to Penn State University. He may have been on a scholarship, so he had a lot going for him, and they were possibly seeing each other. And the theory is he could have been visiting Holly on the weekend before. Now, I did read, I didn't see it myself, but I've read and heard from pretty credible sources, which I won't name because I just want to keep their identity safe, but that on the autopsy report, it had said that she had been sexually active around 3 days before, like over the weekend, and that, you know, a lot of people had said that Holly thought that she might have been pregnant, but her autopsy confirmed that wasn't the case. But I suppose, you know, maybe she was late and she was worrying about it, and she told Dave that weekend if he came home to visit her, I was like, hey, you know, I think I might be pregnant. So the story that is the common theory that people think is that, you know, Sid maybe showed up that day to confront Holly, either, you know, alone or with Dave with him even, and angry about, you know, her possibly being pregnant, saying, hey, like, where's your dad? I want to talk to your dad. we need to have a conversation. And so that could be the reason why she called her dad's office looking for him, like, hey, Sid Eltringham's here, and he wants to talk to you, but he was already gone. So people think that this could have, led to an altercation, and, possibly she could have pulled out a kitchen knife and said, get out of my house, and, he lost his cool and, possibly killed her, allegedly. But there's really no evidence, concrete evidence to suggest that he did it. Just circumstantial evidence at best. But why people think that he is the killer is because the detectives in, I think it was 2014, announced that they had named a suspect, that they had a suspect, but they weren't going to name him, but that basically there wasn't enough to arrest him. And then when Sid died, the police said, our suspect, the case went cold on this date. And that particular date was the day that Sid Eltringham died. So they never named him, but they pretty much hinted, they listed the day that he died and said, the case went cold on this day. So publicly hinted that he was the guy. So most people think, he's the one who did it. And I did look into Sid's patterns, and he does have a history not without controversy. He had been involved in domestic disturbances with his wife, and there was another situation where a constable came to his house. I believe he was confronting him about like a late bill or something, and Sid told him that he didn't want to have a conversation with him, that he wasn't going to talk to him. He got in his car and he tried to drive off, and I guess the constable kind of tried to like get in front of the car thinking that he would stop so he could have a conversation with him, and Sid didn't stop and hit the constable. And there was another instance where I found some newspaper articles, which I couldn't find much else about this besides newspaper articles. I do know there's a deposition, and I had seen a little snippet from the deposition, but just a snippet that someone had shared with me. But basically, he worked as a professor at Northampton Community College, and a student had filed a harassment claim against him, saying that he was like obsessed with her and parking outside of her house. He would play I Only Have Eyes for You on his radio. He would leave like letters at her house. There was some instance where he called the local police and pretended to be like her husband or something. It was all kinds of very strange things that she claimed that he did. And then he had called her all these names, like a pig and a whore, stuff like that. And then because she made these statements, he filed a defamation suit against her, claiming that he lost his job and everything because of her. Well, anyway, she made a counterclaim, and then eventually they both dropped everything, claiming that it was just a miscommunication on both of their parts, which I thought was very strange.
Think about how many people possibly didn't bring up his misconduct. I feel like when you have somebody in charge, like a teacher, you're less likely to do it, especially if it's a younger girl. And the only reason I'm saying that is, like, I know today is a different, like, time and age, but, like, at one of my last jobs, there was a very older man who was making very inappropriate comments to a younger girl. She felt very uncomfortable about it, and she was too worried to lose her job because she needed her job. And I was like, hold up, wait a minute. I'm older. I don't care. I'll tell HR for you.
Yeah.
But I feel like if I was younger, probably wouldn't have done it. I'd be too nervous of I can't even say the word, repercussions of it.
Repercussions, yeah. Well, that's what I was thinking too. Like, I wonder if she just dropped everything because, she was scared. Like it had gotten out of control, and she may have not thought that he would fight back or whatever. So, maybe she had dropped it because of that. But he does have a pattern, I guess you could say, of like angry outbursts, domestic issues, strange behavior. So that's what I could find on him. And it seems pretty much across the board that most people do believe that he could be responsible for it. But like I said, they're not enough to say that or make an arrest or anything.
Well, I could see another take on him as well. Like, I don't know, for her to just like think she's pregnant without having a confirmation to have that reaction is kind of crazy to me. Mm-hmm. But and also it seems like being stabbed that many times, that's real anger. That's real like passion. Maybe she wasn't pregnant. Maybe he had a thing for her.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe she's around because she's dating his son. Mm-hmm. Maybe he got mixed messages, or maybe like she was just being nice and letting him like be a little too nice or a little too handsy, and then he maybe tried to progress it and she said no and he got mad. We know how men are. Yep. When they get told no when they're ready, they snap.
Yeah, I had questioned that too. Like maybe, I wanted to know if there had been any parties or events the weekend before she died. Like, did she sleep somewhere at someone's house? Or, I could not figure that out. I tried to ask everybody I could. I was in the Facebook group. I looked everywhere. I couldn't find anything that suggested or talked about what they did the weekend before, if there was some kind of event that went on, because I was like, that would be huge. Like, if she had stayed at Dave's house that weekend, or, something happened, that would be a big deal. But, it's hard to, I guess, go back that far and, expect to find it out if people remember what they did. But at the same time, sometimes people do remember because of a huge event. Like, also on the same day that Holly died, that 3 Mile Island nuclear power reactor failed or whatever that same day. So it was like a very important day in people's minds, because she had been murdered, and then you had the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor meltdown. And so people might remember, but I haven't been able to find anything. But I would love to know exactly what she did the weekend before her death. So another suspect that I've heard his name go around, but I could not find like anything about this guy. His connection was tenuous as best. He was linked through a number in Holly's, people say diary, but it wasn't really a diary. At school where you get like a planner for the week and you write like your homework in. It was like a planner from school, and she did little doodles in it. And she had doodled the number, if I recall, it was either 30 or 32. I think it was 32. But she had written this number 32 in her planner. And when they had asked her friends about it, like, what is this significance of 32, they had said that it was the age of this guy that she had a crush on named George Wilson. Now, apparently the connection there is, from what I've heard, Holly's cousin had worked at a hotel, and she had like rented out a room for them to hang out in one night. And this guy showed up named George Wilson, and he was like an older guy, which is strange that some older guy was there hanging out with younger girls. But that's kind of like chatter. I couldn't find anything about the guy. Nothing. It's just kind of, his name was thrown out there because of that number. But that number could have been somebody's jersey number, or, you know what I mean? But that's what her friends supposedly said. And then there was another guy. His name's Kurt Dowdle. Now, he's not the suspect, but he was a kid that Holly had babysat. He lived 5 houses down from her. he had wrote a book where he claims his father, Archie Dowdle, might have been the killer. So in this book, it wasn't really about Holly. It was more about, like, Kurt's life and how, like, awful his parents were to him, and that his dad was, like, a very mean drinker and treated him, like, really badly. Now, he had no, like, evidence of, I guess, this happening, but his dad, I guess, fit the profile, like, somebody who would be involved, you know, after the murder, somebody who gets involved in the case to, like, keep tabs on it. His dad helped with the reward fund, and he was in an HOA with Richard Branagan, so there is a connection there, and she babysat his kids, which I was like, this seems to be, like, more of, like, the most, like, the best theory for me, at least, this guy. But apparently nobody in the neighborhood believes this guy did it. Like, the general consensus is that book is just, like, for attention from what I've heard. But, I mean, that was more reasonable for me. Like, you know, she babysat these kids. They live 5 houses down. He would know when her dad's not there. Who knows? Maybe her dad even asked him to, like, you know, keep an eye on the house. She would know him if he was a drunk. I mean, some people, when they're drunk, they just turn into mean drunks, and maybe he just, you know, went up there. So that was, like, in my mind, like, motive. Like, that made more sense to me than the Sid Eltringham thing. But, I mean, according to people who, like, know these people, everyone seems to be on the same page about Sid, and people don't really believe that Archie is involved.
Well, I followed a podcast, I want to say years ago. This woman, she's much older, and she, I guess when really, like, episodes started to come out about, like, true crime, and true crime started to pick up, she was like, you know, I guess she saw an episode, she was like, we live near there, and I don't know, and she started looking into it, and she claimed that her father was a murderer, and she ended up solving 2 cases, and people, like, weren't believing her, and she started this podcast to go over a 3rd murder that she believed her father had committed, and they never would have found him if it wasn't for her coming forward, like, going through where they had traveled during his, like, job, his occupations that he did throughout the years. Mm-hmm. It was crazy. But, like, no one believed her until she really had to, like, get down and dirty.
Yeah. That's what it seems like here. Like, he didn't really have anything to, like, concrete to say, I know he did it, but, like, I guess looking back, he was like, well, he fits the profile, he was a drinker, you know, there's a connection there, you know, maybe he could have done it. But it seems like, I don't know how I can say this, but I guess from the town consensus that it seems like he was a guy who didn't get much attention, and, like, maybe they felt like the book was a way for him to get attention after his dad died to write this book. But he did say, like, the day of 3 Mile Island, like, his dad was going to get this camper and wanted to, like, leave with this camper, like, leave town. But that could be because he thought, like, this nuclear reactor was melting down and, you know, people were going to get, like, radiation poisoning. So maybe he was just, you know, panicking because of that. But that was another thing. It was like, oh, you know, maybe he was planning to flee. Who knows? But, oh, and another thing that I've failed to mention, Sid Eltringham, he also ended up, after his teaching, had his teaching job, he ended up becoming a private investigator. And I did hear that he had, you know, tried to investigate the case a little bit, like Holly's case, as a private investigator, like interviewing people and stuff like that. And the reason why I think it even became more prevalent, like they said they had a suspect in 2014, well, they held a grand jury, which I will get to. But so 3 days after Holly's murder, an anonymous call claimed the killer was a local thief and a drug dealer. But the lead ended up not panning out. I guess they said they were, like, in jail with the guy, and he told them, or he was there with them, or he was there with the guy, but he said, like, the murder happened in the woods behind her house, so it didn't really line up. So they just thought this person was calling, I guess, maybe to, get a lighter sentence if he thought, oh, I know who did it. But despite the theories, Holly's case has remained open. There was a reward fund established by Archie Dowdle. Sid Eltringham was involved, and the whole HOA. I think they came up with like $6,000, but then nobody came forward with anything, so they ended up donating the reward fund to, like, I don't remember, to some cause. They donated the money. And in 2010, the Bethlehem Police Department revisited the case with new forensic technologies, and they held a grand jury, which they basically subpoenaed, like, anyone that they had spoke to initially when they investigated the case, and had them revisit everything they knew and have a whole grand jury. And then by 2014, they said that they identified a suspect, but only had circumstantial evidence hinting that the case ended with the death of Sid Eltringham. They never said Sid's name, but like I said, they did say, the case went cold on, I think it was like February something 2016, and that was the day that Sid Eltringham died. So everyone was like, oh, that's obviously who they're talking about. So today, Holly's murder remains unsolved, yet not forgotten. Advocates, including cold case groups, continue to push for re-examination of the evidence and the DNA. And the community and those who knew Holly still hope for closure. And if anyone has any information, they're encouraged to contact Bethlehem PD at 610-865-7000. And also, there was like a Facebook group that I thought was really good. The Unsolved Murder of Holly Branagan. It's a good place to start if anyone wants to look into it. There's a guy who runs it who actually works really hard to try and get the word out for this case. And I do know that a Cold Case Foundation had pretty much like offered their services. They have like this special DNA thing where they can extract hard to get DNA, but whoever's in charge of the case now, which I believe it's Bethlehem PD, but I think they tried to say the state police had it, so I'm not really sure, but they haven't really agreed to, I guess because it costs money and stuff like that, they haven't really revisited it yet. But I know there is people who are trying to reach out to get them to re-examine the DNA and stuff. So hopefully, they will go back and do that. They do have, I believe, fingernail clippings that they took from her that they could possibly test. So.
And I would assume they probably took the knife too. And if that handle broke, you're damn well guaranteed that there's probably blood from the killer on there.
Right.
Or even if the handle hadn't broken, being stabbed 17 times, that's so much blood. If it's in her chest, it's gushing. It makes it slippery. There's got to be mixed blood on it or something.
Oh yeah, they've in almost every case that I've read about, when people kill people in that manner, they always normally cut themselves or hurt themselves because their hand slides up into the blade because you're doing it with so much force. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure there's, some kind of DNA there. It would probably take a lot of work to, I guess take all the DNA that they have on there and kind of process of elimination it, because a lot of people had touched stuff without gloves and everything, but hopefully they will eventually revisit it and try and, see if they can find some real evidence, or even run it through Ancestry. I know they can do that now, run the DNA through Ancestry, because so many people, get their DNA checked on there. You never know. So we can only hope. That's all we have for this episode of Keystone Cold Cases podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and please consider leaving us a review wherever you get your podcast. If you you want to find out more about the podcast, the hosts, and the cases we cover, or if you want to suggest a case, please visit us at kccpod.com or send us an email at keystonecoldcases@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook at Keystone Cold Cases and on Instagram and TikTok at KCCPod. Please remember never to reach out to family or friends of the victims, only to law enforcement if you have any tips. This episode was researched and hosted by me, Caitlin. Find all of our sources, social info, and contact information at KCCPod. Theme music by Darren Mackins and production assistance from Shannon Bickle. Join us again next week for another case to sleuth out. Thank you.